discussing. We are discussing the opinion of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda had made this statement about the difference between a fast day that has to do with Avelos, mourning, and a fast day that has to do with not having pleasure. So there's like Tisha B'Av is more of a mourning type of fast, and the other fast days are more just we minimize our pleasures, mainly food, but also the other pleasures as well could be prohibited. And Rav Chisda made a difference between the two, and he said if it's Avelos, if it's a morning type of a fast, then you're not even allowed to bathe in cold water. But in when it has to do with a pleasure type of a fast, then you are allowed to bathe in cold water. You're just not allowed to bathe in hot water. So that's really what we're discussing. We're bringing proofs back and forth.
Good. Turning the light a little higher.
Good morning, Ben.
Good morning, Rabbi. Good morning, everybody else.
Okay, 10:01. I guess we should begin. Okay, so we are on Daf Yud Gimel Amud Aleph. We're on page 13a, and if you're in the art scroll, let me tell you where we are in the art scroll.
13a2.
13a2, yes. 13a2 on the second column, Tashema. Let me just let Yehuda in. Okay. So 13a2 in the art scroll. Good morning, Yehuda.
Good morning,
everybody. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Rabbi.
Morning. Okay, so we are discussing this statement of Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda had said a statement, which we'll soon see that Rava, in one version, argues on Rav Chisda. So Rav Chisda's statement is somewhat innovative. It's a insight. It's insightful. It changes one's understanding. It's something that's possibly a chiddush, something new. What is his statement? His statement was that there's a difference between a fast day that has to do with mourning and a fast day that has to do with minimizing one's pleasures. The fast day that has to do with mourning, we do not bathe even in cold water. Again, mourning is more of a serious, severe, strict rules, and we wouldn't even bathe in cold water. However, when it comes to a regular fast day that has to do only with pleasures, minimizing our pleasures, so you could bathe in cold water, cleanse yourself, you would be allowed to. So bathing in cold water would be permitted. And the Gemara has asked some questions on this, and we concluded yesterday with a little complicated case where the Gemara wanted to bring a proof that when it has to do with Avelos, you're not even allowed to bathe in cold water. Tried to bring a proof from this laws of mikvah. And it mentioned by the laws of mikvah that there is a scenario in mikvah where you would be allowed to go to mikvah even on Tisha B'Av. What was the scenario? When it's the Tevila Bismana, when it's the mikvah night. The mikvah night means the actual day or night that it's the mitzvah to use the mikvah, which doesn't apply nowadays, by the way, because we add on extra days to our mikvah going. And so the mikvah night, we also call it mikvah night, but it's not the real mikvah night. And in the olden days, when they didn't have these extra stringencies, they actually had something called mikvah night. And that literal, to the fullest extent, meaning of mikvah night, that applied that to the extent that a woman could go to mikvah on Tisha B'Av. Of course, nowadays we wouldn't have a woman go to mikvah on Tisha B'Av, but there was a time when it would be permitted. And that's what our brisa is talking about. And the brisa says that they are allowed to go, if it's the mikvah night, she can go to mikvah on Tisha B'Av. And the Gemara deduced from that it must be talking about, number one, we must be talking about cold water, because hot water mikvah was uncommon in those days. It was impossible to have a hot water mikvah because you would end up drawing the water into a vessel to heat it up. So it would make it non-kosher for a mikvah. So it must be a cold mikvah. And even and the fact is that only this woman who's a mikvah night, she's allowed to go. Everyone else would be prohibited. And this had to do with Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av has to do with Avelos, with mourning. So that would mean that all mourning cases, mourning fasts, or would be prohibited even in cold water. There's an exception, maybe, a mikvah night has one like unique exception, but let me mute everyone. But in general, the concept of going to bathe in cold is a no-no for any mourning situation, any situation of mourning. And the Gemara disproved that proof. The Gemara had a rebuttal to that and said it's not really a proof, because we're talking about Chame Tveria. We're talking about the hot springs. And so it is talking about hot water. Cold water, of course, anyone could go to cold water, and maybe even Avelos, even mourning, even people who are fasting Tisha B'Av could go to mikvah. But a hot mikvah, a Chame Tveria, the hot springs of Tveria, which would be a kosher mikvah, that would be a case where only mikvah night women could go to mikvah on that night. Again, it's mikvah night for Nida and mikvah night for Yoledes. Nida is menstruation, and Yoledes is a woman who gave birth. Those would be the two cases of mikvah night that it would be permitted to use the mikvah. Everyone else would be prohibited because it's hot water. If it was cold, everyone would agree. But the Gemara said that doesn't really work, because there's another rabbi that argued with it that said that even if it's the mikvah night, you shouldn't go. Now, if he said even the mikvah night you shouldn't go, why doesn't he just say, don't use hot water? You can go to cold. Everyone agrees you go to cold. According to this logic that really if it was cold, anyone could use it, could go to mikvah. Why does he say don't go to mikvah? He should say go to mikvah. Just don't use a hot one. That's what he should have said. So the Gemara answers, no, could be talking about that there's no cold mikvahs in that area. There's no other options. There's only a hot spring and there's no other mikvahs. And therefore, the only option was hot. So this Rabbi Hanina Sagan Hakayanim, he says, don't use a mikvah that night, even though it's a mikvah night, because it's hot. But really, if it would be cold, it could be that if there would be cold mikvahs, it could be everyone would agree that you could go in cold, and that would not be consistent with Rav Chizda's view. So we don't have a proof to Rav Chizda's view there. Now comes the Gemara with another proof or another question called Tashma. Come in here. Tashma sometimes is to bring a proof, sometimes it's to ask a question, and or often it's used to ask a question. In fact, the Gemara before wanted to bring a proof. It said Lema Messiah. Let's bring a proof. Let's say that this is a proof. So the Gemara here is asking a question, and it's questioning Rav Chizda's statement that are you really allowed to bathe in cold water on any other fast day? On fast days that don't have to do with mourning, are you allowed to bathe? Now, I should mention that even today, in today's day and age, when we have these fast days, like before Purim, we're going to have Taanis Esther, Tzom Gedalia, Shiva Tammuz, there is a chumrah. A chumrah means stringency that most people don't follow, but there is such an option to follow this stringency that you shouldn't wear leather shoes and not have marital relations and not bathe. There is such a stringency that the same chumras, the same rules that we have on Tisha B'Av could be followed on the other fast days. We don't follow, it's not the common practice, but it is mentioned in the Mishnah Brura in his Sharatziah, and he mentions it that there is such a Baal Nefesh, like a person who has a high level soul, maybe could be machmir. So here we're going to be asking a question on Rav Chisda, that Rav Chisda allowed one to bathe in cold water, and we're going to question that. Yes, Robert. You're muted. Oh. Okay, I thought you had a question. Okay. So the Gemara says as follows: Tashema, come in here. Let me again tell you where we're up to. We're starting inside Tashema, which is maybe about 25 lines. About 25 lines from the bottom of the page. Tashema, if you're in the art scroll, it's 13A2 on the second column. Tashema, come in here. When they said that on a public fast day, you're not allowed to do work, like Amru Ela B'Yom. They were only talking about the prohibition of doing work by day, but at night, the night before the fast, which means the night where the fast officially begins, that is mutter. It is permissible to do work, and it only applies by day. The prohibition of work only applies by day. And we learned yesterday the source for that. We learned that it has to do with, it says atzeres, and it says similar to the gathering, that the prohibition of work is learned from atzeres, and it says it in connection with the gathering that they would do, the kenufia, the gathering they would do on a fast day. They would get together and have like a meeting. And so just like that gathering was by day, so also the work, the prohibition of work, which we learned from Atzeres, is also only by day. So now the Brisa brings that law and says that when they said that you're not allowed to do work, it means by day, but at night it would be permissible. And when they said that it's prohibited to wear leather shoes, well, they only said that law when it comes to inside a city. If a person is traveling, mutter, it is permissible to wear leather shoes. How is this so? When a person goes out to the road to travel, Noyel, he puts on his shoes, he wears his leather shoes. Nichnas la'ir, when he enters the city, he removes the shoes. So there is a permissible, like an exemption when you're traveling. And there's an exemption for work, which is the night of the fast day. Now comes the main point that we're bringing this brisa, this statement of the Tanoic sages. This is the main point that we're bringing. When they said that you're not allowed to bathe, they only said this law with regard to one's entire body. But a person's face, hands, and legs and feet, mutter, that would be permissible to bathe. You would be allowed to wash your feet, wash your head, wash your hands. That would be permissible on the fast day. You're just not allowed to bathe your entire body. Similar laws you find, the same laws you'll find by someone who is a menuda, nidui, from the word nidui, cherem, shamta. These words have to do with excommunication. If someone is excommunicated from and not allowed to have contact with other people, they are in excommunication. Those people also have these same rules. They're not allowed to take it would seemingly, the way the Gemara is understanding it is that it applies all of these laws apply to a menuda, someone who's excommunicated. And here comes an important word, uva avel, and a mourner would be the same laws, that they're not allowed to wash their entire body, but they would be allowed to wash their face, hands, and feet. Now, what does this mean? So let's just think. So we're talking about a fast day, and we're comparing it to an avelus, person who's in mourning, and we're basically saying that the prohibition of bathing for the entire body, but there's an exemption if it's only partial. It's only a partial bathing. Now, my lab, what are we talking about when we say the same law applies to someone who's excommunicated and someone who's in mourning? Akulu, it's referring to all these laws. Uvamayaskinin, what are we talking about? Ilaima b'chamin, if we're talking about, if you want to say that we're talking about chamin, hot water, hanav yadav v'raglov misharu, is it permissible to wash in hot water a person's face, hands, and feet in mourning. Doesn't Rav Shesha say a mourner is not allowed to stick his finger in hot water? For sure, you can't wash your whole face. You can't wash your whole hand. You can't wash your whole feet. You can't wash all three of them. For sure, you can't do that in hot water. So we must be talking about cold water. Elalav tzainin. Rather, must be talking about tzainin, cold water. So when we're talking about cold water, we're talking about a fast day. Think about it. We're talking about a fast day. We're saying that when they said you're not allowed to bathe cold water, that's the entire body. But you are allowed to wash your hands, your feet, your head. You're allowed to wash a few things, a few parts of your body. So what does that sound like? You can't bathe even in cold water. What did Rav Chisda say? Rav Chisda said that when it has to do with just a fast day, if it's not morning, you are allowed to bathe in cold water. So this is a contradiction to Rav Chisda. So the Gemara answers, loy, no. Your analysis is wrong. Your interpretation, your way of interpreting this brisa is wrong. Lo'olam b'chamin. Really, we're talking about hot water. You're not allowed to bathe in hot water your entire body, but you would be allowed to bathe in cold water your entire body, as Rav Chisda said. How are we going to translate and explain the brisa? The kakashalach and this that you asked. You compared it to avelos, that the same laws of avelos apply to this fast day, and ultimately you came to the conclusion that even in cold water you're not allowed to bathe the entire body, and that doesn't fit with Rav Chisda. Now we're explaining that that's not the meaning of it. Well, so then how do we translate those words that the same laws apply to mourning? The answer is no, not all of the laws. Asha Arakoi, it's going on the other laws, not every law, not the law of bathing. It's going on the other laws. Now, what are the other laws? So Rashi here says we're talking about the other laws are regarding Ne'ilah, which is shoes, leather shoes, and Sicha, and anointing oneself. The only thing is the Bach on the side changes it from Sicha to Malacha, to work. So the laws of work and the laws of wearing leather shoes, that applies. The same law applies to a person who's in mourning, a person who's excommunicated. These laws apply. That there are some leniencies with there's prohibitions and leniencies with regard to these two laws, but regarding the law of bathing, that does not apply. Regarding the law of bathing, person who's in avelos would be more strict, but a person who's just fasting for a regular communal fast day, that would apply. The communal fast day would be only a prohibition of bathing the entire body in hot water, but bathing the entire body in cold water would be permissible. So that's the way we're answering this contradiction to Rav Chisda. Tashema coming here, and this is going to be a question on Rav Chisda, where he says that mourning is prohibited in cold water. We're going to prove now that we'll see that even a person mourning is allowed to bathe in cold water. Tashema coming here. Rav Abba HaKohen said the name of Rav Yosi HaKohen. Maisa, there's a story of Mesu Banav Shal Rav Yosi ben Rabbi Chanina, that the sons of Rav Yosi ben Chanina passed away. V'rachatz b'tzayin kol shiva, and he washed his body in cold water all 7 days. And so we see that a person who's in mourning is allowed to bathe in cold water. Gemara answers that that's not a proof, because that case was talking specifically in a case where he had two tragic deaths, one after the other, and there's an exemption in such a scenario for him to bathe in cold water. But under normal circumstances, someone who's in mourning would be prohibited to bathe even in cold water, and that would not be a contradiction on Rav Chisda. That fits very well with Rav Chisda. So that's the answer. The Gemara answer on 13a3, if you're on 13a3, the top of the page, to the top of the second column. Hasam kishetakfu avela hava. That was a case where the avelim, the mourners, came one after the mornings came one after another. From the word takef, takfu, that it was an immediate succession, one after the other. The Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, takfu avelov zachazef. Person had two aveloses, two mourning periods, one immediately after the other. Hichbet sairoi, if his hair gets heavy, kaved, hichbid sairoi, his hair gets heavy, makel besar, he can lighten it with a razor. In other words, a non-usual way of cutting the hair. You don't normally cut your hair with a razor, cut it with scissors. But if you do some type of shino, you do some type of change, a person would be allowed to cut it and lighten the excessive hair, heavy hair that he has. And he's allowed to wash his garment only with water, not with other soaps and stuff. And that would be allowed for such a scenario, such a person who's unfortunately dealing with two mourning periods. Rav Chisda comes and clarifies that it's specifically with a razor, not with scissors. The mayim with water, he's allowed to wash his clothing, but not with neser or natron or sand or chalk. Not with sand. These seemingly were types of clothing detergents in the olden days, and these are not allowed even in such a scenario, but plain water would be permissible. Amar Rava. Now comes the statement of Rava. And now Rava is going to have one statement where he disagrees with Rav Chisda, and then there's going to be another version of Rava, which basically means that there's a question of what Rava's real opinion was. Maybe different rabbis maybe heard from Rava different things, or could be Rava changes his mind at some point. But we have two versions of Rava's statement. The first version is an argument on Rav Chisda. Rava is arguing on Rav Chisda. And let's see what Rava says in this version. Amar Rava says, Avel mutter lirchitz b'tzayin kol shiva. An avel is permitted to wash in cold water, to bathe himself in cold water all 7 days. This is not like Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda says, no, you can't. An avel, anything that has to do with avelus mourning cannot use cold water. Even cold water is prohibited. But Rava, in this version, he says an avel is permitted to wash in cold water all 7 days of his avelus, of his mourning. Midi dahava abisra v'chamra, and his proof, or his comparison, is to meat and wine. Is he allowed to eat meat and drink wine during his 7 days of Shiva? Yes. So just like he's allowed, there is some type of permissibility of having a little type of pleasure, a little slight, something that's a minimal type of enjoyment he's allowed. And therefore, he's also allowed to bathe in cold water and feel a little clean or something. At least, doesn't have to feel dirty. So in other words, there's a permissibility to have some type of a enjoyment, minimal, but yet if he's allowed meat and wine, this also would be similar to that and should be permitted to have to bathe in, at least in cold water. So the Gemara asks now the similar questions on Rava that it asked on Rav Chisda. Some of them are similar, some aren't. Okay, Meisvei, the Gemara, the Bnei Yeshiva asked a contradiction. The student, the schools asked a contradiction to Rava's statement that Rava said that a mourner is allowed to bathe in cold water. We're going to see here that a regular avel is not allowed to bathe in cold water, except for a girl who's supposed to be getting married. She is supposed to be looking for a shidduch. She's of age to look for a shidduch. Her, we're going to give an exemption for. It sounds like everyone else is not going to be allowed to bathe in cold water. That is a contradiction on Rava. By the way, it would seemingly be a proof to Rav Chisda, but we're not dealing with Rav Chisda. Now we're dealing with Rava, and the Gemara sees this as a question on Rava. So now we'll turn to page 13b. Ein ha-baigeres. The baigeres. A baigeres is a girl who's 12 and a half. At the age of 12, a girl turns to a naira. She becomes a adult. Naira means she has 2 pubic hairs, we assume, at the age of 12, and therefore she's a naira. After 6 months, she's now on the stage of baigeres. It's an additional stage that a girl has, that she's now 12 and a half, and she is supposed to be looking for a shidduch at this point, and therefore we'll see a leniency for her. So it says, "Ina baigeres rishal lenavelas atzma." A baigeres is not permitted to make herself disgusting. Be may evel aviha, in the days of avelus of her father, in the days of mourning of her father. There are 2 translations here in Rashi of what this means, the days of avelus of her father. One translation is that her father passed away, and This is the second translation of Rashi. Her father passed away, and she is now mourning for her father, and what it would be understandable, even though her father passed away. This is a very serious avelos. She is allowed to, and she's expected to make herself more presentable, and she's not supposed to make herself disgusting. And the Gemara understands that to mean bathing. That this Baigeres, because we want her to get married, and there's going to be a lot of people coming through the house to visit her during Shiva, and we want her to look presentable, so that maybe this ultimately, she'll find the right shidduch. So we want her to cleanse herself, which would imply that everyone else is not allowed to bathe. But we'll soon get to that. But the Baigeres, she's not supposed to make herself disgusting in the days of Avelos of her father who passed, or the mourning of her father. The other translation of Rashi is something that used to be a law, but doesn't apply anymore. In fact, you're not allowed to do this. Brought in Shulchan Aruch. That there used to be a custom that if a person's relative is sitting Shiva, person's parent, let's say, is sitting Shiva for their relative. So while a relative of this man, let's say Yaakov Avinu, is sitting Shiva for his father Yitzchok. So Yaakov's sons, Reuven and Shimon, when they're in front of Yaakov, they also, as a means of kavod, respect for their father, they also act as if they are mourning. Nowadays, we don't do this. But in front of a relative that's mourning, the relatives would also mourn while they're in front of him. And so the bride, according to this translation, it would mean while her father is in mourning for his relative, the daughter, when she's in front of him, she should not be disgusting. She should make sure to be presentable in front of him. She should take a shower so that while she's so even though normally she should be considered, she should be following the laws of Avelos, but here there would be an exemption for her to take a shower in front of her father who is sitting Shiva for his relative. In the case Rashi brings is that his son passed away, but that's interesting. Shemeis Benoi, his son passed away, but why is that not her brother? It must be that it's her father's son from a different wife. Seemingly that would be the case. Why Rashi chooses that case, I'm not sure. He could have picked any case, seemingly, but he picks that case. So the brisa is going to be a question on Rava. Let's figure out what this question is. So first of all, the brisa, the Gemara says that
Rabbi,
yes.
I would think it's when you are avail for your father. When the girl is avail for her father, I can understand it, because then she would look for a shidduch, because her life is going to get difficult once her father dies. And it would be nice for her to get married.
Right. I hear what you're saying, but I guess that would be the chidush, that would be the unique insight that this is adding, that even though she has her father, but since there are so many people coming through the house, she would be allowed to she would be allowed to not follow this extra law, because because people are gonna mark down, oh, we saw that girl there, forget about her. People are gonna they're gonna start removing her from the list, so therefore it seems like that would be the reason that we're gonna allow it. Okay, so
Rabbi,
yes,
I think I have an idea of why they chose that case, because they're saying that not only in such a case where she's a direct relative, but even in an indirect relative, she has to observe these stringencies.
Well, it's actually a leniency. She's actually not observing. She's actually a leniency, so it doesn't really flow with that.
These particulars, I meant to say. But not only is a direct relative, but even as an indirect relative.
Even an indirect relative, she's allowed to bathe. But of course she's allowed to bathe. The surprising thing would be that she wouldn't be allowed to bathe. You know, even you can't say even an indirect relative she's allowed to bathe. You could say even an indirect relative she's not allowed to bathe. That would be like a way to a proper sentence. But if you're saying she's allowed to bathe, it doesn't fit with the word even. Anyway, whatever. It's the commentaries I see ask some questions on this Rashi because they first of all asked my first question about if it's her father's son, so that would be her brother. She would seemingly be obligated in her own type of mourning. So they want to say maybe Rashi has a mistake there, and it means the brother of her father. It should have said the brother of her father. Yeah. Or the father of her father or the brother of her father. That's the way they want to read Rashi. And according to that, actually, what it changes the halacha according to that interpretation, I should say, because what ends up happening, if you want to reword Rashi, Rashi says, that according to that wording, that shemes that the father of her father or the brother of her father passed away, that would mean that if she's actually sitting Shiva, this actually is the connection with what you said, Ben. It would actually mean what happens if she's really obligated in Shiva fully because her relative passed away, like her father passed away. According to this interpretation, she wouldn't be allowed to be lenient. She's only allowed to be lenient in a scenario where it's indirect. So this maybe touches upon what you're saying, David, but the opposite really, that it's only because it's an indirect that it's actually permissible for her to be lenient. But if it would be a direct relative where she's obligated in mourning, we don't have a leniency for her to bathe. It's only because it's an indirect mourning that there's a leniency. That would be according to this version of Rashi. If you want to change the wording of Rashi and fix it according to the commentary that wants to change the
I think that's what I was trying to say.
Oh, that's what you meant. Okay, good. Oh, very good. So that would be, but again, that would be according to one interpretation. The other interpretation of Rashi would be that her father, Mamish, passed away, and you have that leniency there as well. But okay, good, very good, David. So anyway, getting back to the Gemara here. So the Gemara said that. So we have the Brisa. Now you have to always figure out where does the Brisa end and where does the Gemara kick in. Where does the Gemara start in analyzing the Brisa? So the Brisa ended with these words. It was a one-sentence Brisa that a Beigeres is not allowed to make herself disgusting or unpresentable in the days of her father's Avel. That's the end of the Brisa. Now the Gemara interprets that and analyzes that and says, Hanaira, but if she wasn't the age of a Beigeres, she's not 12 and a half, but she's only 12, she is Risha'a, allowed or supposed to make herself unpresentable, and she's supposed to not bathe. That's the way we're understanding it. So we're giving a leniency to a Beigeres, but not to a Naira, a regular girl who's not in that situation, or seemingly this would apply to a woman who's married as well, you know. But the Gemara gives the case of Naira. Now the Gemara says, my lav, what are we talking about? That she's going to make herself unpresentable. The Gemara understands it. Berachitza, we're talking about with bathing. Uvamai, and what are we talking about? Are we talking about hot water or cold water? If we're talking about hot water, so the Gemara says it would be very surprising to permit her to use hot water. If a regular person can't even stick their finger in hot water, for sure we're not going to allow her to bathe her entire body in hot water. That would be too extreme of a leniency. So the Gemara says, if you want to say you're talking about hot water, she's not going to be allowed to make herself look unattractive. Rav Chisda says, it's by Bechamin. Rav Chisda said that a novel was not even allowed to stick his finger into hot water. So for sure, we're not going to be allowing her to bathe her entire body in hot water to go to that extreme and permit that. Ella lav b'tzayin. It must be that we're allowing her to wash her body in cold water, and which would mean that a regular naira, regular girl, would not be allowed even in cold water. And according to that, it would be a contradiction on Rava, who stated his view that even in cold water, one second. Something's wrong here. Yeah, Rava said his view that it's permissible. Rava said a view that it's permissible to wash in cold water. This proves that she's not allowed to wash in cold water. I don't know if I said it wrong the first a minute ago. Again, what's Rava's statement? It's a little confusing because Rava changes his mind soon, and we're going to see the other version of Rava. Rava's opinion here, you have to keep this in mind. You have to concentrate. Rava holds that an Avel is allowed to bathe in cold water. And here we have a brisa that says only a Begeres would be allowed in a certain scenario to bathe in cold water, but any other mourner, like a Naira, she would not be allowed to bathe in cold water. So this would be a contradiction to Rava. So the Gemara answers and says, nah, we're not talking about bathing here. We're talking about other types of being unpresentable, types of loy, the Gemara says. No, we're not talking about bathing. We're talking about akichol upirkus. We're talking about kichol is makeup on the eyelids, and pirkus is something to do with the hair, either like braiding it or maybe dyeing it, but it's not bathing. Bathing we're not dealing with. So we don't know the law from here about bathing, but we do know that there's a leniency for a Begeres, this girl who's 12 and a half, who should be looking for a shidduch, that there's a leniency for her to put on makeup, and that would be for her allowed. Other people would not be allowed. So we don't know anything about bathing from this brisa, and therefore we cannot ask any question on Rava or prove anything to Rava from this brisa. Again, Rava's statement was that an Avel is allowed to bathe in cold water. And here we don't know we don't know if we don't see any source for it or any contradiction to it from this brisa. Now the Gemara tries to bring a source for Rava. Lema Masayele. Let's say that this is a good source, a good proof it fits along with what Rava, it helps Rava, it supports Rava's statement. Dama Rabbi Avo Akain Mishum Rabbi Yossi Akain, Rabbi Abba Akain Mishum Rabbi Yossi Akain, that we just said this a few minutes ago. Maisa is a story. Maisa Banav Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina. Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina had this. Bar Chanina had this tragedy that his sons passed away. Rachel called Shiva, and he bathed in cold water all 7 days. You see that a mourner is allowed to bathe in cold water. So the Gemara says that's not a proof. Amri, they said that Hassam that case was talking about a case where he had a mourning one after another. And the Tanya, as we learned in a brisa, if a person had mourning immediately one after the other, if he has heavy hair, he's allowed to cut it off lighten it with a razor. He can wash his clothing with water, but not with other. Rav Chisda said the sar he can use a razor, not scissors. He can use water, but he can't use other types of detergents, neser, natron, or chalk, oil, sand. Ahal is some other type of a plant. I think David told us last time what ahal is, but somehow
it's a kind of ice. It's called ice plant.
Ice plant. Thank you.
It's a special kind of plant in Eretz Yisrael that's like crystals that look like ice.
They used to wash the clothing with it. So a person in such a scenario would not be allowed. Thank you, David. And so we see from here that we don't have any proof from this case because it was a case of takfuhu avelov. It was a case of mourning that happened one after another, and therefore you can't prove from there that bathing in cold water would be permissible for all mourners. That was only a certain scenario of mourning, but not the regular case. Ika Diamri. Now comes the second version of Rava. Ika Diamri. Some say that Amar Rava said, Avel is usher b'tzayin kol shiva. That an Avel is prohibited in bathing in cold water all 7 days. And this fits with the statement earlier of Rav Chizda, because Rav Chizda had said earlier, and we brought proofs and questions on Rav Chizda earlier, this statement, and now we have Rava saying the same thing according to this version, that an Avel is prohibited in cold water all 7 days. So the first thing the Gemara says is, why is, according to Rava's reasoning earlier that it should be permissible to bathe in cold water was because it's similar to, you find that there's certain permissibility of enjoyment, small enjoyment is allowed during Shiva. So why is bathing not going to be allowed? At least cold water should be allowed, similar to meat and wine. A mourner is allowed to have meat and drink wine. And so the Gemara answers, that is to ease his anxiety. He's allowed to eat meat and drink wine, but bathing oneself wouldn't help the anxiety issue. And therefore, it would not be allowed, and it would be prohibited even in cold water to bathe. So again, we're talking about the whole body in cold water, and that's what's prohibited. Now the Gemara says, let's say that this is a proof to Rava's statement. What's the proof? A brisa that we just brought. Ein ha-bageres v'sha'al l'navel atzma. A bageres, this girl who's 12 and a half, she's not supposed to make herself unpresentable during the Shiva of her father, whatever that means, the two interpretations that we had. So the Gemara implies from that, her naira risha'a. However, if she would be a naira, she would be allowed to make herself unpresentable, or supposed to make herself unpresentable, and that would imply that she's not allowed to bathe even in cold water. And that a regular person who's in mourning cannot bathe even in cold water. That would seem to be a implication from this brisa. Why? What are we talking about? About a bageres? What type of water are we talking about? If we're saying that a bageres is allowed to bathe in hot water, in a bageres shah, she's not allowed to prohibit herself from hot water. Are you going to say that? And she's allowed to bathe her whole body in hot water? It says it's boy. An avel is prohibited to stick even his finger b'chaman in hot water, and so for sure a bageres we're not going to permit to wash her whole body in hot water. So ella lav, but we must be talking about cold water. That cold water is normally prohibited, but a bageres we're going to permit. So you see, like Rava said, that a bageres is permitted in cold water, but a regular person is not, a regular mourner is not allowed in cold water, and that would fit with Rava. That's a support for Rava. So the Gemara says, no, we're not talking about bathing at all. The Gemara says, loi, no, akichul pirkos. We're talking about makeup and something to do with the hair, and that is what's permissible for a bageres, but bathing we're not dealing with. It could be bathing is permitted in cold water, could be bathing is prohibited. We don't know. Amar Rav Chizda. Okay. Now the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chizda. Rav Chizda says, Zoyse Meris. We see from here, Avel is usur b'tichbaises kol shiva. A mourner is not allowed to launder his clothing all 7 days of the Shiva. He's not allowed to launder his clothing. Now, the Gemara, of course, is not comfortable. The commentaries are especially Rabbi Kiva Eger, they ask questions on this statement of Rav Chizda, very surprising statement of Rav Chizda, because we already learned about not washing clothing, laundering clothing earlier. So what is Rav Chizda bringing from this? That this brisa is what teaches us you're not allowed to launder clothing? Rav Chizda spoke earlier about laundering clothing. That was another different brisa. So Rav Chizda has to prove from here, and what type of proof is it? According to Rav Chizda, the brisa might mean cold water, that a bageres is allowed to bathe in cold water. According to him, it's possible that he learns this brisa differently. And so according to him, you won't have a proof that just because he's allowed to put makeup on, that a person who's a avel is allowed to put makeup on, that doesn't prove that I'm sorry, that a Baiger is allowed to put makeup on, but a regular person is not allowed to put makeup on. That's not going to be a source that a regular Avel is not allowed to wash their clothing, because he won't learn this brisa that is talking about makeup. He would learn the brisa that's talking about bathing. The Gemara said you don't have a proof to learn it that way, but that doesn't mean that they can't learn it that way. You just don't have a proof. You can't say this is a support for him, but seemingly he would learn it that way. That's about bathing. So would Rava, according to this version of Rava. They would learn that the brisa is talking about bathing, and they're not going to conclude that it has to do with makeup. But if you conclude that it has to do with makeup, also you don't need to prove from here that, if regular mourner is not allowed to put makeup on, only Bageres, so that proves that you're not allowed to wash clothing. You don't need to prove it from here. You could prove it from a different brisa, which we had before. The other brisa would prove it, seemingly, that person who has two aveluses, two mourning period, one after another, they're allowed to wash their clothing. That would be seemingly more of a proof to that you're normally not allowed to wash your clothing. Person has 2 mourning periods, then you're allowed to wash your clothing. So the question is, what is Rav Chisda really saying? Or maybe this statement of Rav Chisda really belongs earlier on the previous brisa. That would seemingly fit, because then you could say, you see from here that normally a mourner is not allowed to bathe, to wash clothing. Okay. Now the Gemara concludes and says, "V'hilchasa," the halacha is avel is also lerchait kol gufay. A mourner, is not allowed to wash their entire body, bein macham bein batzayin, even in cold water, hot water or cold water. They can't wash their entire body. Kol shiva, all 7 days. Aval panav yadav v'raglov, but their face, their hands, and their feet, that would be b'cham and usher on hot water would be prohibited, but tzayin and mutter in cold water would be permissible. Of course, hot water would be prohibited, because we said even putting a finger in hot water would be prohibited. So of course, you're not allowed to wash your whole head, your whole hands, your whole feet. You can't wash that in hot water, but in cold water, that would be permissible. By the way, this doesn't apply to Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av, it would be even prohibited for face, hands, and feet. The only leniency would be if a person's hands are dirty, they could wash off their dirt. But otherwise, the hands, the head, hands, and feet, one would not be allowed to wash in cold water on Tisha B'Av. That's a communal mourning. This is mourning for a individual mourning. Here we have a leniency that b'tzayin in cold water, if a person's just washing their hands, their head, their hands and feet, that would be permissible. Aval lasach, but to put anoint the oil on oneself, that's usher, that's prohibited. Feel called kolshu, also even a drop is prohibited. Bin labras azuama, but to remove the filth or the bad smell, so that would be permissible mutter. So that would be like putting on deodorant. That would be permissible on Tisha B'Av, but not on Yom Kippur. By the way, Yom Kippur would be an exception. That Yom Kippur, a person wouldn't even be allowed to put on deodorant.
Rabbi,
to anoint oneself. Yes.
I see Jeffrey is new. I just want to say that you're going very fast because this is a review.
Yeah, I gave him the warning before.
Okay, so
he doesn't have to join now.
Don't get scared. Oh, wait. You're muted. Okay.
I warned him in advance. I told him we're going to start the second parak soon. If he wants to join now, he could, but the second parak, we will be going slower. Okay, so the Gemara that we're up to starts now a new thing, and that is Sloisa de Tainisa Hechimad Karina. The davening on a fast day. Where do you mention that extra prayer, the Anenu prayer? So where is it mentioned in the davening? Adre Rav Yehuda Rav Yitzchok Berei. Rav Yehuda led Rav Yitzchok, his son, Vidarash, and he expounded. Now, this took him on a walk, and he darshaned. He gave a drush. He gave him a little drush. He gave him a teaching. He said, Yachid shekibal of Taanis. An individual accepts upon himself a fast day. Mispal shel Taanis. You have to add that Anenu prayer of the fast day. And where do you add it in your Shmoneh Esrei? Where does the person add it? Where does he say it? Bein Goyel Reife, between the blessing of redeeming Goyel Yisrael and Reife Choyle Ama Yisrael, and those two blessings, Rafeinu, between those two blessings, he adds a paragraph, and he makes a special prayer there that Hashem should listen to his fast, should accept his fast and listen to his prayer. Rav Yitzchok asked a question: does a individual establish a bracha, a special bracha on his own for himself? Is that appropriate? The shliach tzibur does that maybe, but an individual, does he do such a thing? So this is Rav Yitzchok's question on his father. Ella Amar Rav Yitzchok, but Rav Yitzchok rather says b'Shemat Tefillah. You include a paragraph in Shemat Tefillah, which is what we do on our fast days. We added in Shemat Tefillah, and v'chein Amar Rav Sheshes. Similarly, Rav Sheshes said same to Shemat Tefillah. You added in that generic bracha called Shemat Tefillah. The Shemat Tefillah bracha is more of a generic bracha. It's Hashem, listen to my general prayer, all my prayers, and you can add in any prayers that you want over there. And that's where you would add in about the fast, that you're fasting, v'yanenu, and you don't say a special blessing at the end. You just conclude Shemat Tefillah, Hashem, listen to my prayer. So it's more of a general bracha, and that's where you add it in. This is different than the way Rav Yehuda wanted to claim, and that is that the person should make a special bracha on his own, just like a shliach tzibur does, just like the chazan does in mincha on a fast day. The chazan says anenu, and he says a bracha, and he says a bracha at the end. So that's what Rav Yehuda wanted to say, but Rav Yitzchok and Rav Sheshes, they both argue. Meisvei, the Gemara asks a contradiction. Rabbis question this from a different statement. Brisa says, "Ein ben yachid letzibor." There's no difference between an individual and a community. Ela shezem espal shmona esrei, v'zem espal shasrei. The individual davens 18 brachas, and a community davens 19 brachas. Now, what are we talking about? The public community, the chazan. What are we talking about? So, my yachid might tzibor. What does this mean? An individual that says 18 and the tzibor says 19. So again, we're talking about before they added that extra bracha of V'lam al Shinim. We're not dealing with the bracha of V'lam al Shinim here. This is before they added it, and they added it in Yavna, and that was at a different stage, and therefore we're not dealing with that. Okay, so. We're talking about the way the brachas were before they added that bracha. Okay, so my yachid might tzibor, ilem a yachid mamish. We're talking about an individual. The tzibor is a shliach tzibor. If we're talking about the tzibor, the community, means when the chazan says his shmona esrei. So the Gemara asks, hani cha esrei, these 19 brachas is really esrin. There's really 24 brachas, because the 19 brachas that you're thinking that you're going to add anenu, if it's the chazan, he's supposed to add 6 brachas, which we're going to learn in the second parak on a Taanis tzibur, on a communal fast. So it can't mean that. Ela lav hachikama, rather it must mean ein ben yachid l'kibul of Taanis yachid, the yachid shkibul of Taanis tzibur. It must be that there's two types of fast that you could accept on yourself. You could accept on yourself a fast of a Taanis Yachid, or you could accept on yourself a more strict fast called the Taanis Tzibor. And according to that, the way you would read this brisa is that a Yachid shekibel of Taanis Tzibor, a Taanis Yachid, and a Yachid shekibel of Taanis Tzibor only has one difference. Ela shezem espal shmona esrei. The only difference is that this one says 18 brachas, v'zem espal chasrei. This one says 19 brachas, which seems to imply that, or it seems to be saying that if a person accepts on himself a individual fast, he would only say anenu in Shabbat Tefillah. But if he accepts on himself that he's going to do a strict fast, similar to a communal fast, more strict, and it has all the extra rules, can't wear leather shoes and so on. So he's accepting on himself a communal fast. Then he would be reciting the Anenu prayer in a bracha in its own paragraph, and he would end off with Baruch Hashem. Ha'ina la'ama Yisrael based Sarah. He would end off a special ending. It would say in 19 brachas in his Shemana Esrei. And so the Gemara says, Shma mina yachid kovei bracha li'atzmai. This we see from here, not like Rav Yitzchok and Rav Sheshes, that an individual, there are scenarios, not that it's every time, because a yachid could accept, an individual could accept on himself a more lenient fast, but if he does accept on himself a public fast, there are scenarios where he recites a bracha on his own right, not like Rav Yitzchok and Rav Sheshes said. So the Gemara says, "Loi, no, that's not. You're learning this wrong. We're talking about a shliach tzibur. We're talking about the Chazan says 19 brachas. We're not talking about an individual that accepts on himself a fast that's like a communal fast. You're going to say a shliach tzibur esron v'arba matzli. The shliach tzibur, the Chazan, is supposed to add 6 extra brachas. That is the Gimel Taanis Rishonos. We're talking about that we're in the first 3 fasts for rain. During those first 3 fasts for rain, it's much more lenient than the later fasts. And the Leka Esron V'Arba, you don't even have 24 brachas in those 3 fast days, and therefore, because you don't add all those extra brachas, those are added at the other fast days, but not in the first 3, which are much more lenient. And therefore, the Chazan will add 1 bracha for Anenu, but he doesn't add the other 6. The law is that so? You don't say in the first 3 fast days the extra 6 brachas. Ein bain katani. It says ein bain. There's no difference. Ein bain gimel rishonos. There's no difference between the first 3. The gimel emtzayos in the middle 3 fasts. There were the different stages of fast days that we spoke about. There's the first 3, there's the middle 3, and then there's the final 7. Altogether 13 communal fasts. But what comes out is that there's the Brisa here says that there's no difference between the first 3 and the middle 3. These are permitted to do work. And these later 3 are prohibited to do work. So again, if you look back on page 10a, we had the first 3, and in the first 3, the first 3, Bezdrin, Goizrin, it said it's permitted to do work, and that was on page 10a. And then the other Mishnah that was on page was it 12? Let's see, 12b. It said that Bezin adds another 3. It was 12b, and it said over there that asurin b'malacha, they're prohibited to do work. So the middle set of 3 is prohibited to do work, and prohibited in doing all those other sicha, chitza, all those other prohibitions were applicable in the second set of 3, in the middle set, we'll call it. But the permissibility of work was allowed in the first set. So it said, what is the difference in the first and the first set and the middle set? Is that in the first set you're allowed to do work, and in the middle set you're not allowed to do work. But it sounds like regarding the 24 blessings that were added, the extra 6 blessings that were added in the Shemana Esrei, they would both be equal, and there's no difference between the first 3 and the middle 3. So how could you tell me that the Chazan is going to add 1 bracha in Shemana Esrei and they'll make it 19 brachas for a communal fast if really the Chazan is adding 6 brachas and it's 24 brachas, and then you can't translate the brisa the way you want to translate it. And it will end up that there are times that an individual, when he's davening himself, will add anenu and an extra bracha according to this. If you translate the brisa this way, you end up coming to that conclusion. So the Gemara says, no, you can't. You don't have to use that logic, because the brisa that says there's no difference between the first 3 and the middle 3 could really mean that there's other differences as well. Picks 1 about work, but maybe Tana Vashir, the brisa, learned 1 difference, but Vashir, he left out other differences. My Shir, the high Shir, what other differences did he leave out? If he left this out, he must have left others out. So what other difference? In other words, we want to say there's a difference between the amount of brachas in the Shemana Esrei, that the first 3 fasts are 19 brachas because you add anenu, and the middle 3 fasts you have 6 extra brachas, it's 24 brachas. And so But if you want to say he left out that difference, what other difference did he leave out? Behind Bain Katani, it says Ein Bain, which implies that there's no other differences. Ella Tana Be'isuri Kamayri Betfilos Lomayri. Yeah, you want to say that there's no differences. We're not talking about differences of davening. We're talking about differences in prohibitions. And therefore, it's not a problem. You don't see a contradiction. There's no problem from this brisa. Could be that there's a difference in the amount of brachas you say. We're talking about prohibitions. Is anything prohibited on one through three, one of the fast group, the pairs of fasts versus the other pair of fasts? We don't have group of fasts, I should say. We don't have we're not dealing with davening differences. So be by Yasema, and if you want, you could say another point. That is that guess what? Even in the middle fast days, they also don't do the extra 6 brachas. It's only the final 7 that they do the extra brachas. Be by Yasema, if you want, you could say them. So in the middle ones, they also don't daven do extra 6 brachas. The law, and is that so that they don't say the extra 6 brachas? Tanya, we learned in a brisa in Ben Gimel Shniyos, the middle set of fast days called the Gimel, the 3 second fasts, which means the 3 additional fast days, are no different than the final 7 l'shabach reinos. Ela shabela masriyan on the 7. They are masriya, and they lock the stores. We'll soon see what masriya means, but they somehow would cry out, and they lock the stores. Halachol devreim, but all the other things, zevaz hashavan, they would be equal. So if the final 7 they do 24 brachas, then the middle 7 they would also do 24 brachas. And the Gemara says, "V'chiteiman." If you want to say hachanami tana v'shir, if you want to say here also they left out differences. Ein bein katani. It says there is no difference between the middle 3 and the final 7. So it sounds like if the final 7 has 24 brachas, the middle 3 also has 24 brachas, and that would mean that maybe the first 3 also have 24 brachas. But Tizra, do you really think ein bein davka that it means davka? Now we turn to page 14a. V'hashir teva did leave something out. It left out the fact that in the final 7 they would actually move the ark to the town square. And so just like they left that out, they might have left out a difference between the amount of brachas. And it could be that the final 7 you do 24 brachas for, but the middle 3, maybe you don't do the extra 6 brachas, the 24 brachas. Maybe in the middle 3 fast, you don't do that. And therefore, there's a difference between the middle 3 and the final 7. And there's no difference between the first 3 and the middle 3. And what would end up happening is that in the first 3, they don't do 24 brachas. They only do 19 because they say a special bracha for Anenu. And in the middle 3, also they would do that extra bracha. And the final 7 is where you do 24 brachas. But there is a scenario where you have a shliach tzibor, a chazan, who says 19 brachas. And that would be the meaning of that brisa. And what would come out is it's no question on Rav Sheshes, Rav Yitzchok, that they both really hold, that everyone holds that a individual always says Anenu in Shemei Tefillah. We're going to stop here. Sei gesund, everyone. I hope you enjoyed this fast class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Good
Okay.
day, everybody.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Jeffrey, you're muted. You're muted, Jeffrey.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So when it talks about cold water, not sticking your finger in hot water, but clearly you have to put your hands in water to eat. So my understanding is that certainly you can use cold water on your hands and face because of other necessities. And it's not only if you're not clean, but also because you're going to eat. And that also, if it says that we allow a mourner to eat meat and drink wine, isn't it the case that people bring him food? So if people are bringing him food, he's allowed to eat whatever they bring him. He's presumably not preparing anything for himself. So it doesn't, even though it doesn't say that specifically, it seems to be that's why those things that seem to be lighter interpretations are naturally accepted.
I guess your question is, if he wants to eat challah or bread, how does he wash? It must be that he's allowed to wash for bread, but he's not allowed to wash for any other purposes. Basically,
but if he's washing for bread, he's allowed to wash his face.
He's not using hot water.
No, this is cold. This cold water. I understand.
Water. That's no problem.
Yeah, correct. And the meat and wine don't always seem strange.
It's cold water, and it's only part of his body. It's not his whole body.
Correct.
He's washing. Right. So
correct. That's why it says hands, face.
No, but face is a different story. Face would be a whole different story because that's you know, you don't have to come onto some lenient because you have to eat.
So even on Yom Kippur, when we wash our hands, we're allowed to wash our eyes, for example.
Right, but not your face.
But okay, the point is that it's secondary. You're not putting separate water on your face.
Tisha B'Av is very strict as well. That you wouldn't be allowed to wash your face on Tisha B'Av. Again, it's right, even the cold water.
But even if you use cold water on your hands, it's secondary. Then you can wipe your eyes, right? You're not putting separate water.
You're right, but not your whole face. Yes.
So, and people are supposed to bring you food.
So during Shiva, you're talking about the eating, but again, there's no problem there because it's that's a individual mourning, and then there's communal mourning for Tisha B'Av. So communal mourning has more of a strict rules.
Okay, so now let's go to the case of two deaths that followed one another. When they said that he could wash, right? Tabchu, right?
Yeah.
So then he has to actually go to bury the second person.
Okay. So
it seems to me we could also add in that for the cover of going with the group to bury the second time, that also is allowing him to prepare in a different way than if it was just one morning. You understand what I'm saying?
I'm not sure what do you want to permit him to do?
Well, they permitted him to do.
What would you like to permit him? In other words, you're saying he's doing this. He's going out to the funeral. We didn't discuss that, going out to the funeral, but you want to add about going to the funeral. You want to permit him to do what? To take a shower.
Either that or change his clothes. It says what did it say in one place? It says he normally can't wash his clothes.
Right. So it doesn't say clearly that it has to do with because he's going to the other funeral. So I don't know if that's the meaning, because he's going to the funeral. Even if he's not going to the funeral, it seems that the amount of time he's stuck is what's permitting him to have these leniencies. So I don't know if it has anything to do with going to the funeral. That's from the wording.
I see Rashi doesn't say, but I'm just suggesting that.
I don't believe that's correct. I don't know. I'm not sure. But I guess we could look it up in Shulchan Aruch.
But clearly, Shulchan Aruch is different from the Gemara in many ways.
No. These are the sources. So
correct.
We would like to see how it fits. We would like to see how it fits. So if you believe there might be a concept of going to the funeral and that's what we're dealing with, it should be explained in the Shulchan Aruch, that difference. So it could be looked up. Yeah, definitely we should look it up in Yeridea. All right. Anyway, I must run. Sei gesund. Have a wonderful day.
Nice to meet you.